The best laid plans. Arian told himself he was up early because he wanted to start work on the new Floyncy, or first boat, depending on your allegiances, as quickly as possible. But really, it was so he could avoid a drawn-out conversation with his mother. He knew there would be repercussions for asking Codrich to start work before the sun was fully over the horizon. Instead, he decided to pay a visit to the crater's shack on his own and see what he could find out. Arian stopped outside the crater's shack and took a moment to locate all the best used bits to build the wooden structure. He smiled and thought of Eden and Cole's faces when they saw their precious home and workshop had been dismantled. He rubbed his hands together and pulled the door. It was locked. He tried again, this time more forcefully, but it was the same result. Frustration took over and he yanked at the door, which rattled on its hinges, but did not open. The crater's shack did have another door, it occurred to him, though it was a little risky. The Juta thrust him downstream. He let it push him, but fought to keep his hand on the wall, until the wall was gone. His arm fell through the opening and he grabbed at the Floyncy channel. His foot slipped and his body swept past the door as he desperately clung on. His head plunged into the water and went numb. He struggled against the current and locked onto something with his other hand. With his eyes shut from the chill, he hauled his head and shoulders out of the current and reached for new handholds deeper into the shack. His legs flailed in the Juta behind him. With a final surge, he pulled himself out from the current and breached the surface. Well, he was in. Perhaps not in the most orthodox way, but whoever cared for tales of orthodoxy? Arian hauled himself up onto the floor. The water leaked from his clothes and hair and poured onto the boards. He shivered in the air that seemed somehow colder than the Juta. He crossed the room, carefully avoiding objects that looked as though they could produce a nasty cut if touched, to the thing that most resembled a table in the crater's mess. Arian searched for the rest of the morning and didn't find so much as a whiff of information about the Floyncy or how to build one. There were early catapult sketches and little scribbles of a man with cloth stretched onto his arms and between his legs. Arian was pleased to see it looked a little like Eden and had no helmet. There was a piece of paper with Arbella's nail polish ingredients and countless other trivial notes. He had hoped he would have something to show when he went to see the king, but his time had run short and he left via the front door. Unsurprisingly, Codrich was eating when Arian arrived. Arian sat in the corner of the royal abode while Codrich enjoyed his chair at the table, but not nearly so much as he enjoyed his food. The butcher had rustled him up a particularly fatty and juicy chunk, and Codrich had grilled it until the outside was charred black, but the inside remained juicy. Codrich deemed it cooked to perfection. For whatever reason, that was the way he liked it. Arborella was there too, not eating. Come to think of it, Arian wasn't sure he had ever seen her eat a thing. She seemed to get by on a steady diet of loathing alone. She sat ensconced in the corner opposite Arian, where the sound of Codrich's incessant breathing and risk of being sprayed by meat fragments were greatly reduced. Although not impossible, she rued as she flicked a piece off her crossed knee with a pointy finger. Resting across her palm was Crank's only nail file, courtesy of the creators. She had to hand it to them. When threatened appropriately, they did produce the odd useful commodity. She was currently reworking the tips of her nails, which she liked to keep to long, sharp points. She enjoyed how the simple effect of clicking her nails on a table created the sound with a unique ability to make people's brows sweat. She thought the look of them was quite elegant, while they instilled terror in others. Codrich enjoyed the feeling they made on his back. Apologies. There will be no graphic description into the details of this. Yes, it is a pity, but any overly excitable individuals that get their hands on this text could have a serious crisis on their hands. They spoil it for everybody. All there is to know is that Codrich had often told Arborella that her talents were considerable through blubby and soppy thank yous. And although her husband was stupid, she wasn't, and knew she had to provide some positives for Codrich, even if they repulsed her. She quietly studied her hands and tissed. She would have to repaint them too. Blood crimson, as she had requested from the creators, and they had not disappointed. They never did tell her just how they got the colour, but, when asked, Eden had lost some of the twinkle in his eye, and that had been just about the best response she could have hoped for. As soon as she learned of the plan to leave Crank in search of more resources, she had a suspicion things may go awry, and thus demanded a healthy stock of her nail polish be produced. She sat happily knowing that her supply would last her for a while, and even if the creators never returned, there were always threats and torture to ensure someone else would step up to the plate. If the laws of Codrich and consumption were anything to go by, it would not be long until he was finished and ready to hear Arian's report. And therein lay the problem. He didn't have one. His head was in his hands. Once or twice he peered through his fingers to see how much meat was left. Not much now. Arian pulled at his hair and squeezed his palms into his eyeballs, but nothing would come. He didn't know where to start without instructions. He heard Codrich's creak and his chair sigh. Time was up. "So, what have you got for me?" "Sorry, Your Highness. I thought there would be at least a scrap of paper with some information on it, with some plans, but there was nothing." "Well, you can't blame yourself. I could, but you shouldn't," said Codrich. "I'm no creator," Arian continued. "I don't know how to go about building a boat." "This is not creating. Your job is merely to duplicate, a far more menial task suitable to your talents, I feel," said Codrich. "Your back really is aching for the lash." Arborella stirred. "My goodness, show some initiative. We need some wood to get started, don't we?" Arian nodded. "Well, let's get to the streets and find some." "Pardon me, sire, but there isn't exactly an abundance of spare wood lying around Crank." "Not spare, no." Arian knocked on the door to one of the less pillaged buildings in Crank. A man answered. "Good afternoon, sir. I was wondering if I could have a few minutes of your time to discuss a potential business proposition with you." "Go ahead," said the man, crossing his arms and widening his stance in the doorway. If the man's cynicism affected Arian, he did not let it show, and launched into his meticulously worded pitch. "As an intelligent man, such as yourself, will have noticed, the debut launch of the boat did not go entirely as planned, and the creators have taken it upon themselves to delve into a slightly longer mission. I thought it was called a Fluency." "Yes, that's very perceptive of you. It is true that that was the name the creators gave it, but there have been certain grumblings as to whether this is the best name for the device. I prefer Fluency." "Well, I will be sure to voice your opinion to the high-ups in charge of the decision. If I could revert back to the reason why I'm here," said Arian. "Please do." Arian smiled. "Yes. As I was saying, the debut launch of the Fluency didn't go as originally had been hoped, but it was imperative that the creators changed their assignment onto its current trajectory." "Uh-huh. And what's this new assignment?" "Please, sir, allow me to finish." Arian couldn't put his finger on what it was, but he had a sneaking suspicion things weren't going too well. Still, he pressed on. "Now, what we are proposing is a return to the original plan, to cross the Juta and reach the spoils on the other side, and bring some of the fruits of that land back for our benefit, for the good of the people of Crank, such as yourself, sir. As with everything in this life, such a fine premium is not free, but does come at a small, one-time fee. To support this venture, we do require wood for the consumption of the new Fluency. The people I represent are looking for astute individuals, such as yourself, who would be willing to endorse this small expenditure and then reap the rewards. As a founding member, we would be willing to offer you a portion of the first foods and materials from the very first journeys to the land across the river. For this great service, all that we require is a portion of your house, which will be repaid as soon as we extract the wood from the foreign land." The man's dull expression did not change, and Arian leaned in and whispered, "Between you and me, I think my employers may be a little mad to offer such an incredible deal. If I wasn't part of the organisation, I would bite the hands off whoever came at my door with this proposal." Arian stood back and returned to his normal register. "So, do we have a deal?" he finished with his winning smile. "No," said the wily customer. Arion deflated. This was the point Codrich chose to reveal himself from behind the wall. "Just give the kid some of your house." The man was taken aback by his liege's sudden appearance, but his resolve remained. "No." The king sighed. "You can either give it to him and have the benefits he mentioned, or have me take it from you and get nothing, other than a boot in the midriff." The man squinted at his brow, trying to look at his brain, to see what it thought. After some calculation, his brain answered, "I'll give it to the kid." "I think you're making an excellent choice," said Arion. "I'm not sure that was entirely ethical," said Arion as they walked to the next residence on their list. Asking him to leave the wood outside the crater's shack seemed particularly tactless. "Have you ever met a king with access to rich stores of tact?" asked Codrich. "You've been king since I was very small. I can't even remember who ruled before you," said Arion. The king didn't seem to understand the relevance of this, and looked down at his subject expectantly. Arion looked up at his round face. He was curious whether what he was about to say would be deemed as an insult or not. "No, I've never met a king with access to rich stores of tact." "Well then," said Codrich, smiling, presumably happier to be proven right than he was upset to be called tactless. Which made sense. It wasn't often Codrich got to be right, whereas he could be tactless any day of the week. The pair continued to knock on the doors of choice buildings. Sometimes Arion's pitch would work, and the innocent people of Crank would concede their homes to him, although Codrich's threats were needed for the most part to make the sale. Arion wasn't entirely sure he felt good about this, but tried to convince himself it would work out to their benefit in the end. It was dinner time when they had finished collecting, and the king opened the door to the shack so Arion could haul their plunder inside. He mused for a moment. "You would have thought that the craters would have locked their door." Arion sucked at his lip. "Yep." Arion woke up early and promptly told the sun where it could stick it, and fell back to sleep. When he reawakened some time later, his mother was bustling about, and Crank in general was beginning to stretch its arms, lumber to its feet, and scratch itself. After a green breakfast, Arion headed out into the day. The rain of the night before had let up, but drizzly dew still nestled onto Arion's head and shoulders. He headed for the shack, and was surprised to find Codrich waiting dutifully outside. Arion led him inside, and together they inspected the materials they had extracted the previous day. One of the conditions Codrich had issued was that everyone had to label their wood. Arion had tried to explain that this was so he and Codrich knew how much they should return once they had. Arion led him inside, and together they inspected the materials they had extracted the previous day. One of the conditions Codrich had issued was that everyone had to label their wood. Arion tried to explain that this was so he and Codrich knew how much they should return to everyone once they got the fluency up and running, but they knew it was really so Codrich could make sure that everyone was providing a quantity of wood which he felt was appropriate. One or two did not meet Codrich's quota, and so he left Arion at a pleasant march to go and make sure that they did. Arion looked at the wood they already had. It was far in excess what they needed to construct a single fluency. He set about organising the wood into a line, with the longest at one end and the shortest at the other. He had to shift some of the crater's stuff out of the way first, with various clattering noises. He was just finishing straightening the planks when Codrich returned, carrying previously important structural beams over his shoulder. He smiled and dumped them on the floor. Arion quickly shifted his wood bar chart to make room for the newcomers. Codrich looked confounded at the procedure, but he respectfully allowed Arion to finish before he suggested they take it apart. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, I'm not actually sure that's the best plan. I don't think it would be wise to just jump into this. I think we need to take a step back and have a real think about how to approach this." Codrich, who thought a metaphor was something that fell out of the sky, felt that taking a step backwards was a stupid idea, unless you were trying to avoid the metaphor. In any case, he was totally unconvinced that it would change his mind. "Who's king?" he said. Arion knew that him being in charge of the new fluency build was more in theory than in practice. Still, he had hoped that Codrich's whimsical side might have extended the illusion further than it had. "You are, sire." Codrich beamed. "Right. Well, what I think we should do is split up and try our best to build a new and see what happens. Hand me that piece, would you? That bit looks good." Begrudgingly, Arion did pass Codrich the good bit of wood, and the king scampered off happily to the other end of the shack, and when Arion wasn't looking, swiped an axe off a shelf and giggled to himself. Arion, instead, paced and tried to picture the shape and composition of the creator's invention. His thought was broken by Codric scurrying back across the shack for another plank of wood. He froze when Arion spotted him. Codric smiled gingerly. "Had a bit of an accident." Slowly Codric lifted the wood and scuttled back to his corner. Arion winced at the sound of axe on wood. By the end of the day, Codric had done his best to diminish their precious supply. The king smiled at Arion as he locked up the shack. "Don't worry, today was more of a trial run. We'll get it tomorrow. I have utter confidence." "Oh yeah, we'll storm it," replied Arion.